obscure world of parking. We use it every day, but have we really capitalized on the intricacies of our industry? In this podcast, the Parking Network will go behind the scenes and talk to industry professionals about all things parking, from the horizon of evolving technology and even stories of the old days. We hope to encourage and inspire operators and property managers alike to look at parking through a new lens.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to a new episode of the Our Parking Industry podcast. In our little pre-chat, we were talking about how people listen to podcasts. So I wonder where you are right now. Are you in traffic? Are you in your office? Are you running the vacuum while you're listening to this episode? We enjoy our listeners. We are thankful for the feedback we get from you guys. And today's episode is going to be really fun. I'm in the studio with TPN founder Clyde Wilson. Hey, Clyde.
Hello there. How are you?
And then we also have Julie Dixon with us today, which is a treat. Julie ran into us at NPA a couple months ago in Indianapolis, and we had a great time catching up. We got to catch her presentation, and we're really glad you're here, Julie. Welcome.
Thank you, Leigh. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm one of those that listen to your podcast in the car. And as I was telling you and Clyde, it's a very interactive process because I very much engage and talk to the radio when I'm listening to you all. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today for sure.
Julie, we are really excited to have you on our podcast. It's very important for us to have the like you that have this tremendous background in this industry. You have a background unlike most people that deal with on-street and municipal parking. So it's going to be great. I've been thinking about this podcast for a long time, and I'm excited to have you with us.
Well, and I'm really grateful to be here. I don't know if everyone knows, Clyde, our relationship goes quite a ways back in the Temecula group with Parking Today and John Van Horn. And I just always appreciate the opportunity to really kind of talk about our backgrounds and a little bit about our history, without a doubt.
Yeah, so Julie, how did you get into parking?
That's a really fun story because it was honestly monetary driven. I was in college at UC Santa Barbara and I was a CSO on campus. And at the time, UCSB, not only being the #1 party school in America, go Gauchos, but we also had the most bicycles on campus. And so as a CSO, community service officer, I was actually responsible for not only helping impound bicycles and also monitor bicycles on the sidewalks. It was evening escorts to help walk people back to their residence halls, special event security, you name it. And I loved being a CSO. I took that job, honestly, because it was the highest paid student job on campus at the time. I was making $7.21 an hour. And by the way, Clyde, I'm not shy to share, I am 55 years old. This is my year. Yes. And back in the day, still a youngin' for sure, but I have to tell you, honestly, not to divert from the subject, for the first time, I'm starting to feel a bit like an elder, and it's kind of an odd experience because I'm the youngest in my family. I'm the only girl. That's probably an important part of my career path, but for the first time in my career, it's very odd to be kind of referred to or looked to for guidance because I've always been the one that was kind of the follower, the seeker. But back to being a CSO, my lieutenant came to me and said, "Hey, I recommended you for a job at the Isla Vista Foot Patrol." And for those of you that don't know, Isla Vista is the little town that's adjacent to UCSB, unincorporated town, and to this day still remains the most densely populated 1 square mile west of the Mississippi. And being the #1 party school in America, what happened was the law enforcement and public safety were so busy dealing with kids falling off of cliffs, couch fires, you name it, they couldn't get the fire trucks down the street. And so the lieutenant referred me. They were going to hire the very first parking enforcement officer. And I said, I love being a CSO. And lo and behold, he says it pays $15 an hour. And I said, hold me back. Like, who do I talk to? And to this day, I walked into that office, and who would have thought that here, 35 years plus later, that I'd still be working in parking. And honestly, they handed me a ticket book and a pen and a bicycle and said, good luck. And it was, to this day, the baseline of kind of what I do today, because honestly, there was so much. There was so many violations. There were just cars everywhere that honestly, I was just trying to get cars to move. It wasn't about writing tickets. It was about making sure that the disabled access ramps were available, that we could access the fire hydrants, that again, no double parking. So I think that that's kind of where my operating ethos really came from. Was it was really about getting cars to move and getting them to follow the posted rules. And so I learned really early on that it was really about education and compliance. And I do have to highlight, I came full circle just about 2 years ago because we bid a project in Isla Vista, and I got to go back to where it all started. And I'll be honest with you, I teared up a little bit during the interview, even talking about it today, because that's really where my career truly started. And it's something that I'm just super proud of. And I'm really excited too, because for the first time in over 3 decades, we're actually making really significant progress in Isla Vista. And it was honestly a bit through sheer force, a bit of a bull in the china shop of kind of going in there and saying, this has to change. And for the first time, we really are making progress. And I'm really excited to work with the team there, because honestly, I'd probably do it for free because it's a place that needs the attention. And I think that that's really where, for me, it all started. And to be able to come back full circle and take all of this experience and knowledge that I've gained over the last, several decades and put it back into where I started has really meant a lot.
Wonderful. See, that's the kind of background that the true parking professionals really have, that you can always tell with that kind of background. That's the people that love it and stay with it and come to the top of the industry, as Julie has.
Oh, thanks, Clyde. And one thing that I think is important to recognize, a lot of people don't know this about my career. I did leave parking temporarily, but I stayed in transportation. I actually worked for the very first company that brought automated enforcement to the United States. I worked for the company that brought the first red light cameras to the United States.
Wow.
Yep. And that was a game changer. I went there, became a subject matter expert across the country, and helped deploy these automated enforcement systems, and then came back into parking full-fledged. But boy, oh boy, that experience couldn't have been better for me, especially with where we are today, as we talk about introducing more and more automation, and having been on that leading edge when we deployed automated enforcement. There's a lot of great lessons learned as we introduced more automation into parking. So that was a nice little kind of pivot. And who would have thought, again, that all of that work and all of those efforts would, again, pay off of just having that knowledge and expertise.
The Parking Network one time audited a red light program in the city of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah, I know that program.
That was an interesting thing. I have never done anything like it. It was I learned a lot. It was.
We could probably have a whole podcast just on that.
Talk about, yes.
Yeah, no doubt, especially as you go state by state, county by county, city by city, which honestly is part of the challenge that we have in our parking industry today, is the disparity between the legislative rules and the policies. And it's something that, a lot of folks ask me about other countries. In fact, I have a client who wants his program to be just like the programs in Australia. And I have to explain, I'm like, the legislation is different there, just like in Europe. Yep. And it's something that a lot of folks just don't understand. And that's the reality why. The more uniform our solutions can be, I mean, you both know this without a doubt, is just the importance, because, again, for the general public, parking has to be predictable. But I could go off on that whole tangent. I get very preachy when we start talking about parking policy. There's no doubt.
You can preach here, Julie. We invited you.
I appreciate that. My family loves when I start preaching, I'm sure, at the dinner table. There's no doubt. So
I'm sure. Well, you are no longer bound to a ticket book and a bicycle. So your career has flourished in the last 3 decades. Tell us what you do today. How do people get a hold of you? Why would people get a hold of you? We'd love to hear about what you're doing in parking now.
Well, here in October, just this last month or so, we've celebrated our 13th year at Dixon Resources Unlimited. We are a parking and transportation, parking and transportation consulting firm. And honestly, when it started, It was just me. And then the reality was my whole career, I'd been told you should have your own business. You really need to, you're so entrepreneurial. You need to do this for yourself. Why are you doing this for other people? And the reality of what started Dixon was after decades of working for other folks and honestly working 24/7. I'm a workaholic. I'm not embarrassed to admit that. It's just what I do. It's what I've always known. I had been on the SF Park project. For those that don't know, SF Park was the first federally funded program that focused on congestion mitigation for both on and off street parking. What started as roughly a $20 million study became almost a $56 million petri dish. If you had a technology, a widget, a service, or something that you thought could help mitigate the curb, you basically had to go through me to get into the city of San Francisco. And after several years of a lot of gray hair and a lot of challenges and a lot of holding vendors accountable, when SF Park was all said and done, basically it was a project that I was so glad was over because it was hard. It was a lot of work. And I was working for a really large company, $7 billion global company, and parking was just this little niche that I was helping run. And basically all these cities wanted to come to this company and say, I want to do what San Francisco did. And it was the city of Newport Beach, a little small coastal community in Orange County, California, that the company, we really couldn't come to terms on insurance. And the company I worked for didn't really care about this little town in Orange County. And it was the revenue manager there. Her name is Evelyn Sang. I'll always remember her. She hates that I celebrate her, because she said, and I can still remember, I was standing in my client's parking lot in West Hollywood on the phone with her trying to figure out this contract. And she said, gosh, Julie, I just want to hire you. It has nothing to do with this company. And it was at that point in my career, after all of these years of being told to do it yourself, that I said, you know what? The value of this contract, I'm like, I could survive for probably a year if I got this work. And now's the time to jump. And it's funny because I'm like, well, if I got to go flip burgers at McDonald's to make my house payment, so be it. I'm not above that. And that's actually what started the gig. And so, yeah, October 2012, I did it with the intention of helping agencies. My logo is make parking easy, convenient, and accessible. And accessible also means equitable. And that was the launching pad. And I honestly did it with the thought that I'd have more time to go to the beach and to be able to have more downtime. And I jokingly say, but truthfully, I can count on one hand how many times I've gone to the beach on a free time, other than vacations. That's really kind of hilarious. And when it all started, like I said, I never imagined having a team or having employees. And now we've got a team of about 15 people. We got them spread all over the United States. And the reality of is that our other tagline internally is we get shit done. And that's the thing with all of our customers is we really go in there, we roll up our sleeves, we figure out what's broken. We're puzzle solvers. And we help fix it. We help put them on track. And I just still have those pinch me moments. Kind of like what I was even saying earlier, right? I've always been the youngest. I was the only girl. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've done so well in law enforcement, being, such a male dominated environment. Same with the parking industry. Coming into the parking industry when I did, honestly, especially when I came back from red light cameras, everything I've done.
When Barbara Chance.
Yep, exactly. And the reality was, again, not taking no for an answer and bull in a china shop kind of mentality. And it's been a roller coaster, but it's been fun. And I think that's the one thing that anyone that knows me or anybody that talks to me and I talk about parking, they're like, this is contagious. And the reality is it's because I love what I do. And I actually really do love the industry that we work in. I just came from the California Mobility and Parking Association last week and sat on a panel, and it was a women in parking panel. And it was something that I really was excited looking around the room and seeing all of those faces. The collegial aspect of our industry is something that I'm very proud of. And it's something that just really stands out. I always like to describe kind of like in the red light camera industry, we're all heading towards the same or similar goal. And I think it's just important that we all need to be unified in that effort. We may not do it the exact same way, But the reality is we all should be heading towards a similar target. So I think that that's something that really stands out. And it's honestly, even though conferences are a lot, it's why I love going to the conferences so much, because it's almost like reunion time when we all get together. So
It is. You're right. You're right. So, Julie, why don't you start us off with this very important question I think that we have today. Where do you think this industry has become now a true transformational business? We're in that position in our industry where we're about to decide who we're going to be 5 to 10 years from now. And so it's dependent on us to get that decision correct.
Right.
So what do you see as the big difference between where we were and where we are, and where we're kind of headed? You could talk about this for 2 hours, so we got to keep it to a few minutes.
We could. And I think that the one thing, and Clyde, you of anyone know this better than anyone, the speed track that we're on when it comes to technology and innovation.
Right.
We went from a time where innovation was so rare. And then
Right.
as we started to bring smart technology on, just like with our cell phones, we're
Right.
moving at such a pace that it's honestly difficult to keep up with. Not
Sure.
that we aren't keeping up with it, but the general public being able to keep up with it, right? And so the innovation is something that I'm excited for. Don't get me wrong. I'm not one of those old school, nothing's going to change type of people. But the challenge that we have is that parking needs to be predictable when it comes to the general public, and the reality of people understanding how it works. And I know we'll hear all the naysayers that say, oh, seniors can't figure out how to use the tech, or like folks, the unbanked. These are all factors that it's one of the reasons why when I work in municipal parking so significantly is to make sure, again, equitable access.
Right.
But the challenge, honestly, is kind of what I was describing earlier, and it's where I invest a lot of my time, is in the policy. And I think that that's the part that concerns me, is that the tech is the tech. And the fact is, the folks that have those brilliant ideas in their garage, or that, put out the tech, overnight, and really, the disruption that brings, forward, even looking at Uber and Lyft and those opportunities when we had the micro shuttles, or the micro scooters, all of these disruptive technologies. That's honestly how we are going to move the needle. But if the policy can't keep up with the innovation, we're just going to be in gridlock. And honestly, that's one of the things that we spend so much time on. We call it future-proofing the municipal codes. But right now, when we talk about kind of the cat out of the bag, the barn door open, right now with a lot of the parking reform that's happening right now, as we talk about parking minimum waivers, it's a real challenge for agencies, because we're having edicts coming down from the state level, but it's not necessarily addressing the need at the actual curb in these dense neighborhoods. And using Isla Vista as the example that I described, when I tell you that the average occupancy in this little town is over 106%, and you scratch your head and go, how is that possible? Because of all of those illegally parked cars. But now in California, because of the state statutes, when it comes to new developments, if I develop residential within a half a mile of a transit stop, I am not required to provide any parking. And get this, we have developments in permit in Isla Vista right now that would be built without any parking. And we're talking about already in a community that has no more space for any more cars. And that's where I always tell people, I'll have a job for the rest of my life, because my job then is to come in where the conflict exists and try to figure out where are all these cars going to go. And I'm not saying that the waiving of parking minimums is a bad idea. We have a housing crisis. There's a need. I get all of that. But what I like to describe as right size parking minimums, we can't go from 100 to 0. We have to get there incrementally. And I think that one of the challenges that we have is that we've handcuffed our local agencies and are not allowing them to be able to work with the developers. And I know there's a lot more to this, and I get the reasons why historically, when it's come to development deals. But the reality is we're impacting our communities, and that's really, and it takes years for this to actually bubble up to the surface level, but we're there now. These are policies that passed several years ago. We're now seeing the development deals, and now you have neighbor on neighbor conflict in these neighborhoods. And there's just no place to put these cars. And that's part of the challenge. We talk about shared parking agreements, you name it.
Right.
But these are communities that are already upside down when it comes to trying to mitigate the curb issues. And usually it's in our low income neighborhoods, our most densely populated neighborhoods. And I never thought I'd be a good thing I was a sociology major, because honestly, this is a people challenge. It's not a car challenge. And it's one of the reasons why one of the topics that I actually talk about all around the world is I say parking touches everything, because the reality is it does.
Yeah.
And and again, you guys know that more than anybody. And so that's been a really big part of kind of my operating ethos, and some of that evangelistic aspect of the job is really being out there trying to promote that and try to help folks understand why you can't have an all or nothing. You have to have that blend, and trying to figure out how it's going to work for a community.
I've been, and everybody here at TPN has had to listen to me talk about this for years now, and I'm sure they're tired of it, but we've let the car haters get in front of us. Here, I'm in Houston, and I see articles every 4 or 5 months in the newspaper written about hating cars and walkable sidewalks and all of this stuff. And I'm in Houston. So it's here. And we had it in our neighborhood. We happened to be sitting right on a major freeway that they were going to bring a train through, and they were going to make us a train stop. Well, then the smart city guys got into it and came here, and we're trying to build a neighborhood with no cars, right? So we've let them get in front of us, and I think it's going to be on us to turn this around. Nobody's going to do it, Julie.
No,
but a few of us, and if we don't get out there in front of this, they're winning. And I hate to see it.
I agree. And I have to tell you, we need to all live in harmony, right? We all need to figure this out together, and I appreciate the concept of zero cars, but this is not going to happen by forcing the square peg into the round hole. And I think that that's the challenge. Now, it's funny because just last week I was at a council meeting, and there's a policy in 2 California cities that have been on the books for decades. In the cities of Cerritos and the cities of San Mateo, their rule is that in order to be eligible for a parking permit, a residential parking permit, you have only licensed drivers in a household. And then there's a cap. But what that does is it prevents me, who lives by myself, from basically having 5 cars. So now that's the policy, that when you start to try to mitigate car ownership, that's the way that you start to mitigate car ownership. Is the fact is that to eliminate the ability for me to store my other 4 spare cars. So last week we were at a council meeting, and this policy, we have been bringing this in for probably the last, I think, 7 years, and it's really had an effect. It's really modeled it. Like I said, Cerritos and San Mateo have proven that it works, and now we're bringing this into all of our programs. So last week, I'm at council looking for this residential parking permit that we've been working on for 4 years to get adopted. And this one council member says, well, what about my hobby cars? And I'm like, I actually got called flippant for the first time ever in my entire career. Not proud of it, but this guy got into it with me on the dais because he wanted the ability to have permits for his hobby cars. And I just was like, you just don't get it, man. Like, you just aren't listening. The fact is, like, how are you as a city going to be responsible for hobby cars when we're talking about people just trying to get a parking space so they can get to their 3 jobs, that they have to try to manage? So this is where that disparity of understanding policy and the reality of what we're trying to do. But there's things like that licensed driver policy that can actually start to move the needle, because then you're really starting to talk about car ownership and the ability to mitigate my desire or want to have 4 or 5 cars. So it's little things like that I think can add up. Rome wasn't built in a day. And that's the one thing I say on every project I work on. We didn't get to where we are overnight, and we're not going to solve it overnight. And I always tell people on the front end, you're not done talking about parking. Like, I'm not magic, and like, we can come in here and solve the issue at hand, but this conversation is going to continue. So yeah, that desire to eliminate cars, like, I get it. But in our world where we don't have necessarily reliable transit that can get us to where we need to be is something that in the United States, it's very unfortunate. But the reality is, if I don't live in a metropolitan center, the transit options for me are not viable for me to be able to get home from work. How can I tell
Right.
someone that you need to take transit and then transit ends at 6 p.m.? Like, how am I supposed to get home from work? So those are the legislation has to match the transportation requirements before you start making all of the parking changes. And I think that's where that chicken or the egg aspect comes in here.
You mentioned like this right size parking policy. Could you give an example of what that could be? Or maybe you know of one and you could just tell us about it. But I want to know, you said that going from 100 cars or 100% to 0% is not the answer. But what could work? Like what policy could move things forward?
Well, I think this is where when we start to look at, obviously parking minimums historically have been about, one bed equals one parking space, or, two bedrooms equals, 1.75 parking spaces. I think there's an opportunity to bring flexibility to that when you look at the number of units and then you look at an estimate and creating that, formula of how many parking spaces would be ideal for a location like that. When you then measure the transportation options that surround that development, because that's one of the things specifically here in California that we're challenged by. The legislation currently says if you develop within a half a mile of a transportation stop, then you don't have to provide parking. But there are no rules associated with how that transportation stop is defined. And so I think that that's where we really have to start with is that a 24/7 transportation stop that has turns every 15 minutes? Those are the things that I think we need to really think about. Is it doesn't have to be overly dramatic or over complicated, but we have to have the basics to understand we're providing these waivers to try to get people on transit, which again, big advocate of. But the reality is you have to be sure that it's reliable transit. And we're talking about in the communities that need to be served. Again, these are often people that are working multiple jobs, that have families. The ability to navigate that, discourse is something that I think is so, so critical. But I will also add, we're working with a community in Colorado where it's a really innovative concept where they're going to actually provide transit passes to it's a pilot zone, and all of the residents in that area are going to receive transit passes. I love it. I think this is a win-win-win, and especially when transit is free. Although I have a whole nother set of stories about free transit where people don't ride it, but I digress. But in this particular community, they're still eligible for parking permits. And so this is something where when we start to talk about that balance, well, how are you going to put people on transit and provide them with that when you're still going to give them parking permits and not have a cap on the number of parking permits? So I think that this is when you start to talk about, again, balancing the scales. You need to come forward with a realistic solution that really starts to blend what are you trying to achieve. It's not going again 0 to 100, but your ability to figure out what that blend is so that with those free transit passes, how can I truly get people onto transit when I'm still then also encouraging or motivating the parking at a very low and affordable cost too. So I think that's where I'm just talking about, honestly, what I think are common sense answers, realistic answers that oftentimes don't come into play when we start talking about parking management policies.
So, Julia, it sounds like that every city in the country needs to hire us
That's
to
for
go in
sure.
there and reevaluate their parking and I understand it's, I've been reading this now for several years where they're saying, well, you can't have one parking space for every bed or two parking spaces for every bed and a half. I understand that. That was developed at a time in the 60s when this country was growing, the interstate systems were going in.
That's right.
Everything was changing, and the people who made those did the best they could with what they had to work with.
That's right.
So, yes, now's the time to reevaluate those numbers, no doubt about it. But
you
trying to
book
go
it.
out there and throw numbers at it or throw zero at it
That's
is
right.
not going to get us to where we need to be.
And you know what kills me, Clyde? And I know you'll appreciate this. When they show the pictures of the football stadium, empty parking lot, or the shopping mall, empty parking lot, It drives me nutso because the reality is that is not in our dense residential neighborhoods. Show
Right.
me, I work with the city of Santa Ana, and I think right now the city of Santa Ana is either the 5th or 6th most densely populated residential neighborhood in the United States.
Right.
And show me a place in Santa Ana where I have that type of, field of parking availability. Because trust me, if I had it, I will fill it up. But
Right.
and I know that that's something that the reform folks will hate that I said that. But the reality is there are so many cars. I have people coming home from work at 3 o'clock in the morning, having to park miles from their homes and
Right.
trying to walk home in what isn't necessarily a community that they feel safe walking home late at night. So it's a challenge because, again, we all know if it bleeds, it leads, right? So that's what I use as my pictures to be able to demonstrate, why parking reform has to happen. And I'm not saying it
Right.
doesn't have to happen. It just needs to happen in a balanced way because, again, right now the pitchforks and torches are being lit in these neighborhoods and we are truly pitting neighbor on neighbor. And that's the challenge. Anybody who's ever had to deal with people that use their trash cans as a weapon to protect their parking spaces, like this is something that we deal with on the daily. And people literally weaponize lawn chairs in the parking spaces to try to protect the spaces on their block face so that their kid can have a parking space when they get off work, in the middle of the night.
So it's solving this problem is going to come back to us and Julie Dixon
right.
getting out there and having 400 jobs to do in cities across the country to try to
Yep.
get these numbers right. We really do need to look at how we're going to help this because
Right.
it's the people that are out there now in front of us are not going to help this problem. They're only going to make it worse.
It is, and it's really about blend. Agreed completely.
It really is. Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. We can modernize all of this into something that works for everybody.
That's right.
So, and I don't believe new trains are going to save us. So it's just not going to happen. They've gotten too expensive, way too expensive to put in. And by the time you spend the length of time it takes to build a new train track to somewhere, the population's grown so much you haven't taken anybody off the streets.
That's right. Don't forget, I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, and just because you put another lane on the 405 freeway doesn't mean traffic gets any lighter, right? We all know those stories, and it's a lot. And I really think, and I did mention free transit earlier. I worked in a community that had literally gold-plated buses, guaranteed run times, 10-minute cycles. Everything was on time. Beautiful buses, Wi-Fi enabled. Free transit, and nobody was on those buses. It killed me because I thought I was being literally handed like the gold bar of solutions, and nobody would ride those buses, and it really kills me. And this is where, again, with parking reform, I get it, because the reality is that is a viable resource, but people just won't get out of their cars. So, but again, when parking was valued at $1 an hour, why would I get in the bus when it was so cheap for me to park? So this is, again, where you got to have a balanced solution.
Okay. So, Julie, this is a popular subject. This is, again, something that we talk about all the time. And I didn't realize that your background started on this question. So what's your take on the same people that we were just talking about pushing bicycle lanes all over our communities, especially our major downtowns?
So obviously we understand the importance of just transportation safety, and the protected bike lanes is really something that is important, but nothing is more painful than when those bike lanes sit empty or go underutilized. And I also think that as we talk about protected bike lanes, and in some cases, because of the street width, they're able to retain the parking spaces, but then talk about that education curve of having curb, bike lane, car, traffic. And then when people get out of their cars, crossing those bike lanes can often be a challenge. So this is something I have literally seen torches being burned and blood being shed over these curb spaces when cities are going out and obviously implementing these protected bike lanes and eliminating parking. And I think that this is one of the challenges that communities are going to continue to face moving forward, is how to be able to bring that balance. And I know I'm working with a city in Northern California where they're looking at this main arterial, But what they've done is they've actually mapped out that arterial and looked for the alternative path to put the bikes on an alternative path that keeps you as parallel and as married to that arterial without being on the arterial. So I very much appreciated that extra effort that traffic engineer went to try to mitigate that challenge. But I will also share that Atlanta DOT has a pretty robust program. And I've seen this presentation now twice because when I saw it at the Mid-South conference, I actually asked if they could come and present this at the SWAPTA conference. And so I just saw it for the second time. And one of the things that I was really excited about that ADOT did was using the data. They actually are also counting the number of bikes that are being utilized in the protected bike lanes. And they actually identified several streets where the bike lanes were so underutilized that they used the data to actually revert the spaces back. Now, mind you, that's an expensive investment, but what I really appreciated was their use of data to mitigate the curb space and to identify the opportunity to actually transition the location back to loading zones or parking zones. And so I do think that that's something that our ability to leverage the data on whether we're making parking management decisions or transportation management decisions, I think is really essential. But it's also mind-boggling to me that when we go to communities that are weather impacted, and I don't know about the recreational cyclists that are out there riding their bikes in the snow and sleet, but I do know that there are avid bicyclists that do. But I do think when we start to make the decisions that are affecting the majority of our curb spaces for such a minor part of the population, that's why I described the city in Northern California, because I really appreciated the model that they took so that there was still a protected bike lane and is still a path. It just wasn't necessarily every street and all of the arterials, because that's honestly something too that affects commerce, is that when we start to mitigate and change out our paid parking or our commercial parking spaces that are intended for customer parking, that also affects our business and retail. And we all know brick and mortar is obviously challenged and suffering as we move forward. So these are important decisions that we have to be mindful of. But if there's one more thing I can say, because I think our bike listeners will appreciate this, can we please ensure that we have secure bike parking locations? Because we have all of these amazing corridors and all of these amazing protected bike lanes, but then where am I supposed to put my bike when I get to my destination? Especially if I'm an avid bicyclist, I probably have a pretty nice bike or an e-bike now that are in the thousands of dollars. And there's no place for me to park this bike securely and hope that my bike will be there when I get back. So I think that's another part of that kind of first mile, last mile aspect of this, is making sure that we have secure bike parking that along with those protected bike lanes as well.
Speaking of bicycle parking, my oldest son, well, I live in the Pacific Northwest. My oldest son is a bicyclist and he wanted to ride his bike to the grocery store. We just needed like two things. So he said, well, I'll just ride my bike down to Albertsons and I'll, put my stuff and I'll ride back. Well, he got to Albertsons and there is no place to put his very nice bike. So he ended up taking it in the store and just pushing it around while he was in the store. And he said he got a lot of funny comments and, which he dealt with, I'm sure, with grace. But yes, I hear you. Bike parking is a part of this conversation.
It is.
Well, while we're talking about the curb, Julie, tell us what you're seeing. What is happening on the curb? What cities are managing their curb? What tools are working? Tell us what the whole world needs to learn about curb management.
My goodness. Well, again, it's evolving at such a pace that it's very difficult to keep up with. I think that we're all still trying to figure it out, I think is the key, is that, this kind of gradual dipping our toes in. There are a lot of pilot projects in some of our major metropolitan areas that I'm very pleased to say, are definitely testing, evaluating, and looking at the data. But one of the things I think that is really the game changer is the use of optic technology. As we talk about automation, anywhere that we can use camera-based technology is key. But if there's one thing that I can always say, because this goes back to my, automated enforcement routes and red light cameras, if the camera can't see it, it can't detect it. And so I think that's one of the challenges when we have a lot of these new innovative companies that are coming on the scene. They'll install the cameras in, say, the winter time, and then suddenly spring comes along and all of the flowers are blooming and all the leaves are back. All of those banners in our downtowns that, highlight all of the spring activities come in, and suddenly the cameras can't see everything that it saw before. And so I do think that that's something that we'll definitely have to mitigate through, having worked with a lot of the technology providers on SF Park and the use of repeaters and all of the different ways to improve our cellular signals and the way to, communicate with the technology. I do think that that's an innovation that will help be mitigated over the years as, our comms improve. That's going to be something that'll obviously help because truthfully, if we're going to start to leverage, especially fixed mount equipment, the reality of us being able to have more infrastructure because the comms are less of a challenge, I think will become something, because the opportunity to use optics and the new cameras that are coming out is something that we're definitely going to see more and more of. And then that goes along with the use of automation, is that slowly but surely we're seeing some states that have already introduced the ability to do automated enforcement with parking, and we're slowly eking in that direction. It'll take a while, just like the utilization of red light cameras or speed enforcement. But this is where policy comes into play. We can't forget about the policy. And that's the one challenge that I also have, is that because I came up with this brilliant idea in my garage and I'm out there selling it, I need to understand the policy in a state or in a city before I can actually sell it to them. But that doesn't stop some of the vendors in our industry, quite honestly. They get the right ear and they get out there and then they get ahead of ourselves. And what folks don't understand is if we get too far ahead of the policy, we could end up handcuffing ourselves for the future. And so you really have to be mindful of being able to have pilot legislation that allows you to act on some of these legislative policy ideas, because otherwise we could end up, biting off our nose to spite our face. That could have a really big impact on the future. And I know I'm not telling everybody you have to stay in the lines, but you got to at least be on the paper, because if you end up throwing a monkey wrench into something that, we've been working on for, decades, the reality is it can be a setback that we won't be able to recover from for quite some time. And I've seen that happen time and time again. But this issue of the curb space is just going to continue to become more and more challenging. And the ability to leverage technology and our communities is going to be something that's going to create constant conflict, because the reality is we have new drivers, we have old drivers, and everywhere in between. And the fact of getting everybody onto a similar page is not an easy thing to do.
No, you're right. This is, I think, and there were several other questions. This will all kind of blend together, but the curb management, the technology, the changes that are coming, 15 years ago, you would have never convinced me we would be where we are today, with this ton of technology people that have created something that they think will solve the world for us.
Right.
They may have never parked a car.
That's right.
Like I was working with one of those a few years ago on a project, and they were trying to install it and they couldn't get it installed. And I'm talking to them, and it turns out neither one of them had a driver's license. They had never driven. So, this technology then is getting pushed at us.
Yep.
And the thing that we have to do, we have to be better buyers. The people that are your clients, our clients, us, we have to be better buyers. We have to be better at evaluating these people that say, I've got the greatest thing in the world, is going to solve your problem, and here it is.
That's right.
And we have to be a better buyer at trying to fish through this, because you're right. There's a lot of this has come in. There are people that have put things in that are not working, and then they get a bad taste, and then everybody gets mad, and it's just no reason to have this. So it's a challenge, and it's not going away. It's not going to go away.
No, and I know you're like this too, is that I'll talk to anyone. You got a new technology, a new idea.
I want to hear it.
And I'll have the conversation with you. And guess what? Advice is free. I'll give you all the suggestions and all of the concerns. And the
Right.
reality is whether you listen to that or not is really up to you,
Up
but
to
it
you.
does come from, years of understanding experience where just consider these things, because I'm literally telling you, these are the roadblocks you're going to hit, and these are the curb stops that are going to be in front of you, and the
Mhm.
ways to be acknowledging that. But I also will say, not every idea is a gem. And the reality of, helping folks understand that is something that, I hate having people tell me my baby is ugly. I mean, we all do. But the reality is that's something you got to listen to. It's up to you whether or not you take that feedback and what you do with it. And I think that that's an important part in our industry, is that there are folks that have been doing this for a long time. And the reality of listening to their guidance, I still do it today. I love talking to new faces, but I especially love talking to those that have been in the industry, because we have so many complex challenges ahead of us that when I get to speak to the folks that have been doing this a long time, and back and forth dialogue about how would you solve this, how would you challenge it, there's no challenge that I haven't been able to address without having talked to my colleagues. And I think that that's the thing in our peer of our industry, is that peer feedback, that collaboration is how we're going to move the needle. It's how we're going to bring that innovation and make sure that it's solid, and that it can solve a challenge, and that it can be a solution that can be a mainstay. There's a lot of stuff that have happened, over this just last 10 years. And it's amazing to see the momentum and progress that we're making. But it
Right.
has to be through collaboration. People that are working in their little silos or in their little boxes are fools for it, because the reality is the only way we're going to do this is if we do it together. And the collaboration is how we're going to be able to innovate and how we're going to make differences.
Sure. I think there's one other thing that I wanted to ask you. Would love to hear your opinion as we've moved through, and staying with the technology theme, as we're moving through this transformational industry with all of this technology being thrown at us. I've watched it struggle with the on-street parking because there's so much coming at on-street. And how are we going to get through this and move forward now to something that when I get out of my car, I will actually know how to pay? You
Oh
know,
goodness. Yes. Well, you are singing my song. On Street is my
right,
favorite.
right,
I do love an on street challenge. And the reality is, as we're transitioning more to plate-based solutions, which again, the
right,
wave of our future, this
right,
opportunity of how to communicate. And the one thing, if I could give the one piece of advice, is that the placement of your signs has to be predictable. And
right.
that's something that you have to be predictable, especially in your commercial districts or even in your residential neighborhoods. The parker has to have an understanding of where that instruction is going to be. And you need to have signs no matter what anybody says. And obviously, for those of you who are listening, the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, MUTCD, they also have to be compliant if they're on street. But I
Right.
need to be able to get out of my car, look left, look right, and be able to see a sign, at least in the nearby distance, that I can understand what or how to be able to park and what I'm supposed to do. And we've all seen those signs, the ones that, have 25 signs up a street pole. And I always used to joke, I have to get out my abacus to figure out what the rules are. And yes, an abacus is an old device. Many of you probably don't know what that is, but I digress. But I do think that the signage has to be predictable, and it has to be simple. It has to be simple. If we can't,
Oh yeah. All right.
if my aunt can't park and look and figure out what the rules are, then we're doing it wrong. And it's often that my aunt that I use, she's about to turn 75 years old. And I will always remember one time I was visiting a city, and I put her in front of the parking equipment and said, figure out how to pay. And I honestly had a good chuckle to myself, but the reality was if she can't figure out how to pay, then the problem is we're doing it wrong. And she's a very smart, educated person, but just like the average Joe, if you can't figure it out and it's not easy to do, we're not going to have compliance. Which that's the one other thing I do have to highlight, because I would be remiss in this podcast. It's all about compliance. It doesn't matter what you charge. It doesn't matter what the rules are. If you don't have folks out there enforcing your policies, then what are we all doing here? But that'll always be at the core root of what I believe in as well.
That's right. You know, I know we're at the end of our time slot here, but John Van Horn and I tell the story all the time. He and I were out to dinner a couple of years ago, and we parked in a place that had metered parking, and we couldn't figure out how to pay. So we just decided.
Parking experts.
Right. John looked at me and he said, there's 100 years of experience here, and we can't figure out how to pay this thing. So we walked away.
Well,
we figured we were going to get a ticket, right? We thought, well, we'll get the ticket and we'll just pay the damn ticket. So we come back after an hour and a half of me trying to listen to John because his hearing's gone, or him trying to listen to me. And we got back and we didn't get a ticket. So we said, screw it. So,
well, it's because of John Van Horn that I don't pay for parking when I park on street, because he taught me a decade or so ago that he hasn't paid for parking. And I think in that time he'd only gotten 2 tickets. And so I can attest to the same situation that over the last 15 years, I do not pay for on-street parking, and I have only received 2 tickets. And funny enough, they were in the same city. And so kudos to those parking enforcement officers, because they were really diligent. But for me to tell you that that's how lackluster our resources are, because we're just cutting in the places that we shouldn't be cutting. And the fact is that the chances of me getting a parking ticket are slim to none. And I encourage every agency to invest in their parking compliance programs, because that's really, if you want to make a difference, that's really where it starts.
Right. Parking compliance is so terribly important. When you're in this business, you realize how important it is. And it's something that we're just still struggling with, trying to manage it across the boards. There are some cities that do a pretty good job, but you're right. I follow John's rule and your rule now too, that when I park at an on-street space, I don't pay anybody.
Absolutely.
Right. It's always more fun to get a ticket and then deal with trying to pay the ticket, or fight trying to pay the ticket.
And see what that process is like as well.
Oh boy, it's a ball.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. Yes, it is. Okay, Leigh, I think you want to wrap us up here.
Yes, I'm so disappointed that the time is gone. To our listeners, I hope this podcast episode went as quickly for you as it did for me. I still have questions on my list for Julie that I did not have time to get to. So go check her out. Go find out what she's doing about the education and the compliance and the policies in the parking industry. Thank you for who you are, and thank you for all that you do. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today, and I hope your week is off to a great start.
Thank you for having me today. I really appreciate it. And I'll always come back for part 2.
Okay, well, good, because there are so many subjects still outstanding. We're going to have to do a part 2. So it was a pleasure for us to have the opportunity to have you on here, Julie. It was great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Clyde. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are.
To quote one of the greatest business minds of our time, Charles Munger, he said, "The best thing a human can do is help another human being know more." Here on our Parking Industry Podcast, we want to provide knowledge and resources. If you heard something that sparked your curiosity in today's episode, please reach out on our socials at TPN Consulting. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. See you next time on Our Parking Industry.